I was curious as to what you said earlier about the election in Israel. And you said that the supreme leader, who was unelected, would agree to a rapprochement with Israel if there was a legitimate two-state solution. I think to some that strains one's credibility. Perhaps you could build on that.
First of all, you cannot say really Iranian leader is not elected. It is another mistake many Americans they have saying Iranian supreme leader is unelected. Iranians, they elect assembly of experts, 80 people. And this assembly elect the leader. In Europe, the people, they vote directly for parliament. The party who has majority in parliament, they nominate the chancellor or the prime minister. Can you say German chancellor is unelected? It's exactly the same Iranian mechanism. Second, why everybody is talking about Iranian position? Iran does not recognize Israel. It is true. 50 other Muslim countries, they do not recognize Israel. The US allies in the region, they do not recognize Israel. Saudi Arabia, with such an excellent relation you have ever had for 40 years, every sophisticated weapons, every political support, do they have democracy? Do they recognize Israel? US allies in the region also, they do not recognize Israel. I mean, if we have 57 Muslim countries, 50 of them they do not recognize. But everybody is talking about Iran. Nobody is talking about the US allies even. And the US has no problem with its own allies when they do not recognize Israel. Believe it or not, there has been too much exaggeration about Iranian position on Israel. However, I cannot deny the hostilities between Iran and Israel. No doubt, Israelis have threatened for 35 years Iran. You have heard 1,000 times the Israeli Prime Minister has invited the US to attack Iran. Then if you hear from Tehran to erase Israel or wipe Israel off the map, this is exactly like the slogans, rhetorics of Israeli Prime Minister you hear every day in the US, inviting the US to attack Iran for military strike. But if, to my understanding, if there is rapprochement between Iran and the US, Iranian hostility between Iran and the Israel would decrease. Because Iranians, they do not consider Israel as a major threat. They don't care about Israel. For Iranians, the real national security threat is United States of America. Because the US army, military is everywhere around Iranian border, from Persian Gulf, Afghanistan, Turkey, NATO, everywhere. And when the US is saying all options on the table, sanctions, pressures, regime change, this is the real national security threat. Why such a US policy would push Iran toward more hostility against Israel? Because from Iranian perspective, this is Jewish lobby, AIPAC, pushing the US for pressure against Iran, sanctions against Iran, and they revenge in the region. The Israelis, they pay the cost in the region for their policies in Washington.